How can the power of meditation change past traumas, experience, and memories?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. Well, think about this. A memory is just where neurons actually connect. So you learn a bit of information, right? You learn, you learn how to ride a bike. You read a book about it. You read a book on how to cook Mandarin cuisine. You read a book on how to dance the salsa. All of that information is stored in your thinking neocortex, right? So it's philosophical. So a person has a trauma, right? The stronger the emotion that they have from that event, the more altered they are inside of them, the more the brain freezes a frame and takes a snapshot. And that's called the long-term memory. And that image, or those series of images, are embossed neurologically in the brain. So the stronger the emotion, the more we pay attention to the cause. And that's what creates the memory. Now, here's the problem. The problem is that when we think about that problem, when we review or remember that past event, we're producing the same chemistry in the brain and body as if the event was happening. Now, the body's so objective, it doesn't know the difference, Alex, between the real life experience that's creating the emotion and the emotion that the person is experiencing by thought alone. So the body's believing it's living in the same past experience 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And so now the person can't think greater than how they feel. So they feel sadness, they feel guilt, they feel pain, they feel suffering, they feel hostility. And those emotions tend to drive the same thoughts for them to remember the reason why they feel this way. And so people get caught in these loops of thinking and feeling. So that creates a state of being, right? So thoughts are the language of the brain and feelings are the language of the body. And how we think and how we feel creates our state of being. So without the person knowing this, by reviewing and remembering the problem, they're taking a thought and a feeling, an image and an emotion, a stimulus and a response, and they're conditioning their body emotionally into the past. Now, the trauma does not only exist in the brain, the trauma now exists in the body too as an emotional memory. So if the person can't think greater than how they feel, and they believe that their thoughts have something to do with their destiny, they're thinking in the past. And if you're thinking in the past, you create more of the same life. So we started noticing that when people are altered, when they're angry, when they're frustrated, when they're stressed, when they're fearful, when they're suffering, when they're in pain, the arousal of those emotions switches on a primitive nervous system that causes the brain and body to go into stress or survival. And when we're in stress and when we're in survival, we're always trying to predict the next moment based on what we've learned in the past. And stress is created from the loss of control, the inability to predict what's going to happen, and the perception that things are going to get worse. So 70% of the time, people are living in a state of stress and living in survival. It's not a time to create. It's not a time to open your heart. It's not a time to be vulnerable. It's not a time to learn. It's time to run, fight, or hide.
Yeah, and
So
also all the inflammations in the body and all the like diseases. They want to grow that way.
exactly. So now we were looking at to see what happens to the brain. Well, when we're in stress and that person's in trauma and they're trying to control everything in their life, they're shifting their attention from one person to another problem, to another thing, to another place, to another object. And every one of those elements has a neurological network in the brain. So the arousal of the stress hormones causes their brain to fire very incoherently. Now, when our brains are incoherent, we're incoherent. When our brains aren't working right, we're not working right. So the obsession of the stress hormones causes us to narrow our focus on whatever the cause is. So when we're in stress, we obsess, we loop, we overthink. We narrow our focus on something. So we thought, my goodness, there's some research out there that shows that if you teach people to broaden their focus, to begin to, instead of focusing on everything material and physical that's causing the stress, everything that's known, broaden their focus and put their attention on space, on nothing. And the act of doing that causes the brain to begin to synchronize, to begin to unify, to become more coherent. And what syncs in the brain links in the brain. So the person's brain starts functioning normally and starts to improve without any medications, without any therapies, just a simple act. And the more they do it, the more order that's created in their brain, the more they can focus their attention and move into a more creative state. What do I want? How successful do I want to be? How healthy do I want to be? How much love do I want in my life? You can ask the bigger questions. By the same means, when the person is gripped by those hormones of stress and they're not running from that predator, they're not fighting, and they're not freezing and hiding, but the chemicals are running, their heart is beating because it's in an aroused state, but it's beating against the closed system, and the heart starts beating incoherently. When that happens, energy leaves the heart, and we stop trusting, we stop believing in ourselves. So we teach people how to create brain and heart coherence, and what we've discovered just in the last couple years is that when this heart starts beating orderly, and it's a skill, just like anything else you do, like dancing the salsa, like when you understand all that information and now you're in the application of it, once you start to experience it and you get the feeling of what it feels like to be in this state, it turns out that when the heart is coherent, it starts informing the brain. You'll see it, the brain starting to change because the heart is telling the brain it's time to create. Now it's safe to create. It's the creative center. So the person all of a sudden can see a possibility that they never could see before, and they can embrace the emotion of the event, listen closely, before the experience happens. Now this is fundamentally important because most people are waiting for their wealth to feel abundant and worthy. They're waiting for their success to feel empowerment. They're waiting for their new relationship to feel love. They're waiting for their healing to feel gratitude. That's cause and effect. That's waiting for something outside to change, to take away this feeling of emptiness or lack or pain or guilt or whatever. We found out that when a person can actually embrace the emotion before the event, they can begin to condition their brain and body into a future experience, and the brain and body don't know the difference. So all of a sudden, the person who was traumatized and had their experience, now all of a sudden they're teaching their body emotionally how to live in a new environment, and the body doesn't know the difference between the real life experience and the one that they're fabricating. So in a sense, by creating brain and heart coherence, the stronger the emotion they feel for their new vision of the future, the more they're going to pay attention to the picture in their mind, and they're literally remembering their future. And now there's biological changes in gene expression, in neurological circuitry, in brain coherence, in immune regulation, in digestive balance, in microbiomes, and all the things we measure show the body's now out of survival. It's time for growth and repair. So the side effect of that is we see people with those serious health conditions that were actually initiated because of the trauma. All of a sudden, when they feel that elevated emotion, it's like they've taken their body out of the past into the present moment. And now the body all of a sudden recalibrates. And if the quotient of their excitement for their new life, for their new future, the emotional quotient of their dream is greater than the betrayal or the shock or the trauma, there's immediate reorganization in the brain and an immediate change emotionally in the body. And now the person looks back at their past, and we've interviewed enough people to know this is the truth, and they say, I don't want to change anything in my past. All of that brought me to this moment. And that's the moment the past no longer exists. So people can have a brutal past, where we've had people that have had abuse, physical, sexual, emotional, that have gone through all kinds of abuse, were suicidal, had all kinds of health conditions, and in one instant, in one instant, one inner experience from the meditative process begins to change everything about the way they see their past. They're seeing it from a greater level of consciousness. They're seeing it from a place of love. They're seeing that all of that had to happen. It makes sense to get to this point. And now they're no longer victimized by their disease. They're no longer victimized by their past. In fact, they'll tell you, that had to happen for me to have my healing. Now, they're in a new state of being. The disease, the trauma exists in somebody else. They've just become somebody different. And so the side effect of that is we've seen blind people see, we've seen deaf people hear, we've seen people in wheelchairs that have been paralyzed from strokes step out of wheelchairs. We've seen people with all kinds of rare genetic disorders that science had no solution for. There it is, and then it's gone. So a crazy time in history for us, because our science is just so compelling to show that it all lives within you.